The woman standing beside me wasn't my girlfriend, but the moment Su Wangking saw her holding my arm, the color drained from her face. I hadn't expected Su to come. Then again, 5 years ago, I would have been overjoyed to see her anywhere. Now, I only felt tired. Xin Yu. Her voice came from behind me. I stopped walking. The woman beside me looked at me, then at Su, immediately understanding that something complicated had just entered the room. Su stood several steps away, still wearing the same coat she'd worn when she left the house that morning. Her hair was slightly messy. Her eyes were red. She looked like someone who had spent the entire night searching for something she had only just realized she was about to lose. I slowly turned around. "What are you doing here?" Su stared at me. Her gaze moved from my face to the woman's hand resting lightly on my arm. Then she looked back at me. "I came to find you." "For what?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in 5 years, Su Wangking looked like she didn't know what to say to me. I almost laughed. This was the same woman who could silence an entire boardroom with one glance. The same woman who could make hundreds of employees nervous just by walking through the office. Yet now, standing in front of me, she couldn't even explain why she'd come. The woman beside me gently released my arm. "I'll wait in the car." I nodded. She walked away without asking questions. Su watched her leave. "Who is she?" I looked at Su calmly. "Someone I met." "Someone you met?" Her voice tightened. "Yes." "Is she your girlfriend?" "No." Su's expression relaxed for half a second. Then I added, "Not yet." Her face immediately stiffened. I hadn't said it to hurt her. At least, I didn't think I had. It was simply the truth. And somehow, the truth seemed to hurt her more than any angry words ever could. She took a small step toward me. "Xin Yu, what does that mean?" I looked at her. "It means exactly what it sounds like." Her fingers tightened around the small box she was carrying. The same box that had held the diamond ring she gave me the night before. The ring was still sitting on the table at home, untouched. "I came because I wanted to talk to you," she said. "We talked last night." "No, we didn't." I raised an eyebrow. "You gave me a ring. I thanked you. Then you asked why I wasn't happy." "You weren't happy." "I was tired." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." Su stared at me. Then she whispered, "Are you really tired of me?" The question caught me off guard. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because 5 years ago, I would have given anything to hear her ask it. Back then, I would have immediately told her no. I would have promised her that I could wait another 5 years. I would have proposed again, and again, and again. But now, I couldn't lie. "Yes." Her eyes trembled. I looked away. "I've been tired for a long time." She swallowed hard. "You never told me." I gave a faint smile. "I did." She frowned. "When?" "Every time you ignored my proposal." Her expression changed. I continued. "Every time you chose someone else over me. Every time I waited somewhere alone while you were somewhere else. Every time I convinced myself that next time would be different." I paused. "Those were all ways of telling you." Sue's lips parted. "I thought you were just angry." "I was. And now." I looked directly at her. "Now I'm not angry anymore." That seemed to frighten her more than anything else I'd said. Because anger meant I still cared. Anger meant there was still something to fight for. But indifference? That was different. Su stepped closer. "Xin Yu." I said yes. "I know. I bought you the ring." "I know. I agreed to marry you." "I know. Then why are you acting like none of that matters?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Because you said yes after I stopped asking." Silence. The words seemed to hit her. She lowered her head. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "I thought that's what you wanted." It was. "Then why isn't it enough?" I took a slow breath. "Because I don't want a yes anymore." Su looked up sharply. I could see the disbelief in her eyes. She had spent years believing that my love for her was something permanent, something she could put aside and return to whenever she wanted. Maybe she thought I was like a light she could switch off and on. She never imagined the bulb could burn out. "You spent 5 years asking me to marry you," she said. "I know. You wanted this." "I did. And now you're saying you don't." "Yes." Her eyes turned red. "Why?" I almost answered immediately. But then I remembered something. A younger version of myself sitting outside City Hall in the snow, holding a ring. The woman waiting in the car was named Lin Yao. She had been working with a company that had recently approached me about joining their management team. I had met her only a few times. She knew nothing about my relationship with Su. She only knew that I was leaving a company where I had worked for years. And unlike everyone at Su's company, she never treated me like I was simply Su Wangking's assistant, employee, fiancé, or shadow. She treated me like myself. That difference mattered more than I expected. When I opened the passenger door, she looked at me. "Everything okay?" Yes. She studied my face. You don't look okay. I'll be fine. She started the car. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Then she asked quietly, was that your fiancé? I nodded. Ex-fiancé. I thought about it. I don't know yet. Lin Yao smiled faintly. That's complicated. It is. She didn't ask anything else. I appreciated that. After a while, she handed me a cup of coffee. I figured you might need this. I accepted it. Thanks. She smiled. You're welcome. For some reason, that simple exchange made me feel strangely peaceful. No expectations. No arguments. No accusations. Just kindness. I looked out the window. For 5 years, I had thought love was supposed to feel like fighting for someone. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe sometimes love was supposed to feel like breathing. The next morning, the office was unusually quiet when I arrived. People kept looking at me, then looking away. Apparently, everyone already knew about my resignation. As I walked toward my desk, Vice President Chen came over. Shin Yu. Yes, President Su is waiting for you. I nodded. I'll go later. His expression became complicated. She said immediately. I looked toward Su's office. The blinds were closed. I could see her silhouette behind the glass. For years, I would have rushed inside the moment she called. Today, I finished organizing my desk first. I packed my personal belongings into a box. A photograph, a few books, an old coffee mug, and a small keychain Sue had given me years ago. I stared at it for a moment. Then I put it back in the drawer. Some things didn't need to be taken with me. When I finally entered her office, Sue was standing beside the window. She turned around. You're late. I looked at the clock. I was packing. Her eyes fell on the box in my hands. You really intend to leave? Yes. She walked toward me. I thought you were just angry. I told you I wasn't. She looked down. I couldn't sleep last night. I didn't respond. I kept thinking about what you said. She swallowed. You said you had been tired for years. Yes. I didn't know. I know. I thought you were happy. I wanted to be. She closed her eyes briefly. Then she opened a drawer. Inside was a thick stack of photographs. She brought them over and placed them on the desk. I recognized them immediately. Photos from our first year together. Our first dinner. The day she signed the papers for her first office. The night we celebrated when her company landed its first major client. The two of us sitting on the floor of an empty office, eating takeout because we couldn't afford proper furniture. I stared at the photographs. I remember all of this. I said, I do too. Then why show me? She looked at me. Because I finally realized something. What? You were there for all of it. I didn't answer. You were there before I became successful. Her voice trembled. When everyone told me my company would fail, you stayed. Yes. When I didn't have enough money to pay the employees, you worked overtime without asking for anything. Yes. When I was sick, you stayed beside me. Yes. When I was scared, you told me everything would be okay. I lowered my eyes. And when I finally became successful, she whispered, I started treating you like you were the one person who would never leave. Silence filled the office. I didn't deny it. Because she was right. She looked at me. I was wrong. I breathed out slowly. I know. She seemed surprised. You don't even want to argue. No. Why? Because I spent 5 years trying to make you understand. I looked at the photographs. I'm tired of explaining myself. Sue's tears returned. Then let me explain myself. I stayed silent. She walked closer. Gu Jingchen isn't what you think. I looked at her. I don't want to talk about him. You need to hear this. No, Sue. I shook my head. For once, whatever happened between you two isn't my problem. Her face paled. I never cheated on you. I didn't answer. I swear. Okay. That's all you have to say. Yes. She stared at me in disbelief. You don't even care. I smiled sadly. That's the problem. She went quiet. I cared too much for too long. I picked up my box. Then I walked toward the door. Shin Yu. I stopped. Can you give me one more chance? I didn't turn around. One chance to do what? To start over. I closed my eyes. 5 years ago, those words would have been everything. Now they sounded like something arriving at the wrong address. I don't know. Sue's voice became desperate. Please. I turned around. If you really want to start over, don't ask me to forget the past. She nodded quickly. I won't. Don't ask me to trust you immediately. I won't. And don't expect me to come running just because you finally decided you want me. Her eyes filled with tears. I understand. I looked at her for a long moment. I hope you do. Then I left. That afternoon, I completed my final paperwork. By 5 o'clock, my desk was empty. Vice President Chen personally walked me to the elevator. Are you sure about this? Yes. You know President Sue might try to stop you. She already did. He sighed. You really changed. I smiled. Maybe I just finally became myself. The elevator doors opened. Before I stepped inside, my phone vibrated. A message from Lin Yao. Dinner tonight? I looked at the screen, then smiled. Sure. The elevator doors closed. And for the first time in 5 years, I left Su Wongking's company without wondering whether she would come after me. That evening, I met Lin Yao at a small restaurant. Nothing fancy. No cameras. No celebrities. No expensive private room. Just two people having dinner. She asked me about my plans. I told her I was considering joining a new company. She told me they were preparing an executive position for me. I laughed. I've never been an executive. You've been running half of Su Wongking's company for years. I was never given the title. Maybe that's why you're finally leaving. I looked at her. She smiled. You deserve to be recognized. Those words stayed with me. After dinner, we walked outside. The city lights reflected on the pavement. For the first time in years, I wasn't checking my phone. Then it started ringing. Sue. I let it ring. It stopped, then rang again. I ignored it. Then a message appeared. Can we talk? I didn't reply. Another message arrived. Please, just once. I stared at the screen, then locked my phone. Lin Yao noticed. You don't have to answer. I know. We continued walking. But a few minutes later, my phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't Sue. It was an unknown number. The message contained only one sentence. If you leave the city tomorrow, you'll never know why Sue really chose Gu Jingchen that night. I stopped walking. Lin Yao turned around. What happened? I stared at the screen. The message disappeared. Then another one arrived. This time, there was an attachment. A photograph. I opened it. My heart stopped. It was a photograph from the night of the concert. Sue and Gu Jingchen were standing beside the car. The same picture I had seen online. But this photograph had been taken from a completely different angle, and in the background, barely visible beneath the streetlight, was someone I recognized. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone I had believed was nowhere near the concert. My hands tightened around the phone. Lin Yao stepped closer. Who is that? I couldn't answer, because suddenly, 5 years of memories were rearranging themselves in my head. The missed proposals, the strange coincidences, Gu Jingchen's warnings, Sue's sudden changes, and that night at City Hall. Maybe I hadn't understood what happened at all. My phone vibrated one more time. A final message appeared. Ask Sue what happened to the 100th proposal before you decide to leave her forever. I stared at those words. Then, for the first time since I had decided to walk away from Su Wongking, I wondered if I had been walking away from the wrong story. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Ask Sue what happened to the 100th proposal before you decide to leave her forever. Lin Yao touched my arm. Xinyu, you're scaring me. I turned the phone toward her, then stopped myself and pulled it back. It's nothing. It's clearly not nothing. I looked at the photograph again. The streetlight, the car, Sue and Gu Jingchen standing too close. The way I remembered from the version everyone had already seen online. But this angle was different. This angle showed someone else. A shape at the edge of the frame, half swallowed by shadow, familiar in a way I couldn't yet name. I need to go home, I said. Lin Yao didn't argue. She just nodded, and that quiet understanding unsettled me more than any question would have. The number that sent the message was already dead by the time I tried calling it back. Disconnected. No voicemail. No trace. I sat on the edge of my bed at midnight, zooming into the photograph until the pixels dissolved into noise. The figure in the background wore a coat I recognized. Not because I'd seen it in person, because I'd seen it in a company holiday photo 2 years ago, hanging in the hallway outside the finance department. I set the phone down slowly. It couldn't be him. He'd left the company before Sue, and I had even gotten serious. I told myself I was imagining things, the way exhausted minds invent patterns out of static. But I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I opened my laptop and began searching for a name I hadn't thought about in years. Wei Han, former deputy director of finance, dismissed 18 months into Sue's company under circumstances nobody ever fully explained to me. I remembered him as quiet, competent, unremarkable, the kind of employee you forgot existed until a spreadsheet needed fixing. I remembered something else, too. He had resigned the same month Sue stopped taking my calls for an entire week. The same month she came home pale and refused to explain why. I had asked her then. She told me it was nothing. A vendor dispute. Contract details too boring to repeat. I had believed her, because 5 years ago I still believed most things she told me. Now I wasn't so sure believing had ever been the safest choice. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling until the sky outside turned gray. I didn't go to Sue's office that morning. I went to Vice President Chen's instead. He looked surprised to see me. Technically, I no longer worked there. You're back fast, he said. I need a favor. You resigned yesterday. I know. This isn't about the resignation. I showed him the photograph, cropping out the message that came with it. His expression shifted the moment he recognized the shape in the background. That's Wei Han's coat, he said quietly. You remember him. Everyone who worked finance remembers him. He didn't just resign, Shin Yu. He was let go quietly, and President Su made sure nobody discussed why. Why? Chin hesitated. Because whatever happened, it involved her father. Her father, Director Su Rongwen, semi-retired for the past 3 years, rarely seen outside family gatherings and hospital checkups nobody talked about openly. I remembered a version of him from early in our relationship, sharp-eyed, commanding, the kind of man whose approval Sue chased even after she'd built an empire that made his own look modest. I remembered a different version, too. Friendlier, quieter, present at fewer dinners as the years passed. I had always assumed it was simply age. What happened to him? I asked. Chin's jaw tightened. I don't know the details. Nobody does. But there was a hospital stay, 5 years ago, right around. He stopped himself. Around what? Around the same week you proposed to her the first time she seriously considered saying yes. I left Chin's office with more questions than I'd walked in with. 5 years ago, the 100th proposal, or somewhere close to it, though I'd stopped counting precisely after the 50th, had happened outside a private dining room, the night before her father's supposed hospital stay. I remembered that night clearly. I remembered kneeling. I remembered her face going white, not with joy, but with something closer to fear. I remembered her saying no so quickly it felt rehearsed, and then refusing to look at me for the rest of the evening. I had spent years assuming her refusal was about us, about whether she loved me enough. I had never once considered it might have been about someone else entirely. I called Sue. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. I need to see you, I said. Where? Not the office. There was a pause. My apartment. An hour. I arrived early anyway, standing outside her building the way I used to when we were still young enough to think showing up unannounced was romantic instead of desperate. When she opened the door, she looked like she hadn't slept either. You came back, she said, and there was a fragile hope in her voice I hadn't heard in years. Don't misunderstand, I said. This isn't about us. Her face fell slightly, but she stepped aside to let me in. I showed her the photograph on my phone. She went very still. Where did you get this? Someone sent it to me. Anonymously, along with a question about the 100th proposal. Sue's hands began to shake. Sit down, I said. She didn't. Sue, I need you to delete that photo. Why? Because you don't understand what you're holding. Then explain it to me. She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself the way she used to when she was a girl still building her first company out of borrowed money and stubbornness. That night, she said slowly, the night you proposed outside the restaurant, someone approached my father earlier that evening. Threatened him. Threatened the company. I didn't know until after. Threatened him how? I don't know exactly. He never told me the full details. He just told me that if I said yes to you publicly, in front of everyone, something would happen to him. I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. So you said no. I said no. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because you would have done something reckless. Confronted someone. Made it worse. That should have been my choice. I was trying to protect you. By letting me believe for 5 years that you simply didn't love me enough. Her eyes filled instantly. I never let you believe that. You decided that on your own. Because you gave me nothing else to believe. She sat down heavily, finally, on the edge of the couch, pressing her palms against her eyes. I thought if I kept you far enough from the truth, you'd stay safe, she said. I thought that was love. It wasn't, I said quietly. It was a decision you made for both of us, alone. She didn't argue. For the first time, she simply agreed. Who threatened your father? I asked. I don't know his name. My father refused to tell me. He said it was safer if I didn't. And Gu Jingchen. Something flickered across her face. Gu Jingchen has been trying to find out for me. Quietly. For years. That's why the two of you were photographed together that night at the concert. She nodded. He said he had information. We met to discuss it. That's all it ever was. I wanted to believe her. Strangely, some exhausted, cynical part of me realized that I finally did. Why didn't he just tell you what he found? Because every time he gets close, Sue said, voice breaking, someone stops him first. Stops him how? 2 years ago his assistant vanished for 3 days and came back saying nothing, quitting the next week. Last year his car was tampered with. He never filed a police report either time. Why not? Because whoever is behind this has reach. Inside companies. Inside law enforcement, possibly. He didn't want to give them a reason to escalate. I thought of Wei Han's coat in the photograph. What about the man in finance who was dismissed? Wei Han. Sue's expression hardened in a way I recognized instantly, the look she wore in boardrooms right before destroying someone. He wasn't dismissed for incompetence, she said. He was dismissed because I caught him funneling internal reports to someone outside the company. Who? I never found out, but I have a guess. Who? Sue hesitated so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Lu Zongheng. The name meant nothing to me at first. Then it clicked, a name I'd seen recently, attached to the very company that had been courting me for an executive position. The company Lin Yao worked for. My stomach turned cold. That's the company I'm about to join, I said. Sue's head snapped up. What? Lin Yao's company. They approached me about a management role. Xin Yu. Her voice dropped to something close to panic. Lu Zongheng has spent 3 years trying to acquire my company through hostile means. Every offer's been rejected. Every attempt's failed. So he's trying something else, I said slowly, taking me instead. You don't know that, Sue said, though her voice lacked conviction. I ran half your operations for years. Every process, every vendor relationship, every internal weakness. If someone wanted a way to cripple the company without a formal takeover, hiring me would be efficient. Lin Yao might not know anything about this. Or she was sent specifically to recruit me. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. I thought of the coffee she'd handed me in the car. No expectations, no arguments, just kindness she'd offered, so effortlessly it had felt like relief after 5 years of exhaustion. Had it been calculated? I hated how much I suddenly doubted something that had felt so simple. I need to talk to her, I said. Sue caught my sleeve. Be careful. I didn't call Lin Yao that night. I needed to think first, and thinking around her was becoming difficult in ways that unsettled me. Instead, I went to see Gu Jingchen. I found him at a small office on the 17th floor of a building that housed half a dozen unrelated startups, deliberately unremarkable, I realized. The kind of place someone chose specifically to avoid attention. He didn't seem surprised to see me. I wondered how long it would take, he said, gesturing for me to sit. You sent the photograph. I sent it to someone I trusted to actually investigate instead of assuming the worst. He studied me. You've spent 5 years assuming the worst about me. You gave me plenty of reasons to. I gave Sue plenty of reasons to trust me, he corrected. That was never about you. Then explain, I said. All of it. Gu Jingchen leaned back, exhaling slowly, like a man setting down a weight he'd carried alone for too long. 5 years ago, Sue's father was approached by someone connected to Lu Zongheng. A quiet threat, dressed up as a business proposal, accept a forced buyout, or something happens to the company's reputation, its licenses, its people. He refused. He refused publicly and privately, both times. So the threats escalated. That's the night before your proposal. That's why she said no. And her hospital stay. Gu Jingchen's expression darkened. That wasn't age, can you? That was the first warning being carried out. I felt sick. What warning? A mild toxin. Enough to hospitalize, not enough to kill. A message, disguised as an illness. I sat in silence, absorbing something that reorganized 5 years of memory in a matter of seconds. Sue never told the police, I said. She couldn't. Lu Zongheng made it clear that any official report would be followed by something worse, aimed at people she couldn't protect, employees, family, eventually you. Meek, you were her most obvious weakness. Everyone in that boardroom watched you propose to her over and over. Everyone knew exactly how to hurt her most efficiently. I thought of every awkward, humiliating public rejection, every headline mocking me. Every moment I believed I understood the full shape of my own suffering. She let me think it was about love, I said quietly, so I wouldn't become a target. Gu Jingchen nodded once. She let herself become the villain in your story to keep you out of someone else's. I left his office with my hands still shaking. The city outside felt different somehow, the same streets, the same lights, but reframed entirely by a truth I hadn't asked for and couldn't unlearn. My phone buzzed. Lin Yao, dinner tomorrow? My company wants to finalize your offer. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Can we talk first? Just us. Her reply came quickly. Of course. Everything okay? I didn't answer that part. Instead, I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop again, searching this time not for Wei Han, but for every public record connecting Lu Zongheng to the company that had suddenly become so interested in hiring me. The connections weren't hidden. They were simply never advertised. Lu Zongheng didn't appear on the company's official leadership page, but 3 shell entities listed as major shareholders traced back, through 2 layers of holding companies, to an address registered under his name. I sat back slowly. It wasn't proof of malicious intent. It could still be coincidence, or simple opportunism, a rival investor hoping to poach talent from a competitor, nothing more sinister than ordinary business. But combined with everything Gu Jingchen had told me, coincidence felt like a luxury I could no longer afford to believe in. I thought about Lin Yao's easy kindness in the car, the coffee, the silence that had felt like relief instead of interrogation. Had none of it been real? Or had she simply been doing her job well enough that I mistook it for something more? I didn't know which possibility frightened me more. We met the next evening at the same small restaurant from our first dinner. She looked exactly the same, warm, unhurried, entirely unaware of the storm building behind my composed expression. You look tense, she said, pouring tea for both of us. Second thoughts about the offer. Something like that. I set my phone on the table, the shareholder record still open on the screen. Her eyes moved to it. Something shifted behind her expression, not panic exactly, but a kind of resigned recognition, like watching a door close that she'd known would eventually shut. You found it, she said quietly. Found what, exactly? She set down her teacup with careful precision. I think you already know. I'd rather not insult you by pretending otherwise. Tell me the truth, I said. All of it. Lin Yao was quiet for a long moment. I work for a firm ultimately funded by Lu Zongheng. I was assigned to identify key personnel at Su Wangqing's company who might be persuaded to leave. You were the obvious choice. Talented, underappreciated, personally exhausted by a relationship everyone could see was unraveling. So you targeted me. Initially, yes. And the dinners? The coffee? All of it, was that the job too? Her expression cracked slightly. It started as the job. And now, she looked at me directly. I don't know how to make you believe this stopped being work somewhere along the way. But it did. I didn't know whether to believe her either. Does Lu Zongheng know about Su's father? I asked. The threats? What happened 5 years ago? Lin Yao's face paled. What are you talking about? Don't pretend. I'm not pretending, Xin Yu. I recruit executives. I don't know anything about threats or her father. I studied her carefully, searching for the tell I'd learned to recognize after years in boardrooms full of people performing sincerity. I didn't find one. Either she was better at this than I expected, or she genuinely didn't know the darker parts of what she'd been used for. There's more happening here than recruitment, I said. Someone poisoned her father 5 years ago as a warning. Someone's still watching, still threatening people who get close to the truth. Lin Yao's hands trembled around her teacup. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't know it went that far. I need your help, I said. She looked up, startled. Help how? You have access to that company. Records. Communications. Something that might tell us how deep this actually goes. If I do that and they find out, I could disappear the way Gu Jingchen's assistant did. I know. You're asking me to risk everything. I'm asking, I said carefully, because I think some part of you wants out of this already, and this might be the only way that happens without looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. She was silent for a long time, staring at the tablecloth like it might offer her a better option than the one in front of her. Finally, she nodded once, slowly. I'll see what I can find, she said, but you have to promise me something first. What? If this gets dangerous, you tell Su everything. Don't try to be the hero who protects everyone alone. That's how people get hurt. I almost smiled at the irony. The woman hired to pull me away from Su was now the one insisting I stay close to her for safety. I promise, I said. She exhaled slowly. Then give me a few days. We didn't discuss the offer again that night. There didn't seem to be a version of it that still made sense. Walking home afterward, I called Su. I talked to Lin Yao, I said, when she picked up, and she didn't know about your father, but she's going to help us find out how deep Lu Zongheng's involvement really goes. Sue was quiet for a moment. You trust her? I don't know yet, but I trust that she's scared enough to be useful. 3 days passed before Lin Yao contacted me again. Her message was short. Found something. Not on the phone. Meet at the address below. The location was an abandoned print shop on the edge of the industrial district, the kind of place that hadn't seen legitimate business in a decade. I told Sue where I was going before I left, exactly as I'd promised. I'm coming with you, she said immediately. It's too dangerous. So is doing this alone. I didn't argue further. Some part of me, admittedly, wanted her beside me not out of old habit, but because whatever this was becoming, it no longer felt like something that belonged to either of us individually. We arrived together, 20 minutes later, the building dark except for a single light flickering somewhere on the second floor. Lin Yao was waiting inside, a folder clutched against her chest. This wasn't easy to get, she said, handing it over. Sue opened it first. Financial statements, internal memos, a shell company's incorporation documents, dated exactly 6 years earlier. This proves the shareholder connections, Sue murmured. But not the threats. Not my father. Lin Yao hesitated. There's one more thing. A name I found buried in a compliance email. Someone who was paid a significant sum around the time of your father's hospitalization. Who? Lin Yao's expression tightened with something that looked almost like guilt. Wei Han, she said. The finance director you dismissed. He wasn't just leaking reports. Sue's face drained of color. He was the one who administered it. Lin Yao finished quietly. According to this, he had direct access to your father's private physician. Sue sat down heavily on an overturned crate, the folder trembling in her hands. I trusted him, she whispered. He worked for me for 4 years. People like Lu Zongheng don't recruit strangers, Gu Jingqian said, stepping out from the shadows near the stairwell, having apparently followed us without either of us noticing. They recruit people already inside, already trusted, already invisible. Sue startled at his sudden presence, but didn't ask how long he'd been listening. Where is Wei Han now? I asked. Unknown, Gu Jingqian said. He disappeared shortly after his dismissal. No forwarding address. No digital footprint since. Convenient, Sue muttered. Or he's being protected, I said. Kept somewhere he can't talk. Lin Yao's phone buzzed suddenly, sharp in the silence. She looked at the screen and went pale. They know I'm here, she said. Someone just texted me a photo of this building. We need to leave, Gu Jingqian said immediately. Not without finishing this, Sue said. Finishing this gets you killed if we're not careful, he snapped. You have no idea what these people are capable of. I have some idea, Sue said quietly. I've been living with the consequences for 5 years. I took the folder from her hands. We have enough here to go to the authorities. Real authorities, not the ones who might already be compromised. Who do you trust? Lin Yao asked. Gu Jingqian was already moving toward the exit. I have a contact outside the city. Someone unconnected to any of this. We go now, together, before Lu Zongheng realizes exactly how much we already know. We left through a side door into an alley slick with rain that had started sometime while we were inside, none of us having noticed the world outside continuing without us. The drive out of the city was tense and silent. Sue sat beside me in the back seat, close enough that our shoulders occasionally touched, neither of us acknowledging it. Lin Yao rode in front with Gu Jingqian, checking her phone every few minutes with increasing anxiety. They're not responding to my usual contact, she said eventually. That's never happened before. Meaning what? I asked. Meaning either they've cut me off, or something else is happening that I'm not being told about. Gu Jingqian's grip tightened on the wheel. We need to assume the worst from here forward. Sue reached over and took my hand without either of us discussing it. I let her. Some old instinct, buried under 5 years of exhaustion and resentment, recognized that this whatever it was becoming mattered more right now than any unresolved argument between us. Outside, the city lights thinned into darkness. We reached a small guest house an hour outside the city just after midnight, owned by a retired police investigator Gu Jingqian had known for years. His name was Old Bao, gruff and unbothered by the strange hour or the 4 exhausted strangers on his doorstep. He reviewed the folder in near silence, occasionally grunting at something significant. This is enough to open an investigation, he finally said. But Lu Zongheng has resources. He'll move to destroy evidence, silence witnesses, the moment he suspects this is active. Wei Han, Sue said. If we could find him, if he's still alive, Old Bao said bluntly, he's the one piece that could confirm everything directly, which makes him the most dangerous loose end for Lu Zongheng to leave unattended. Nobody said what we were all thinking. If Wei Han knew too much, he might already be gone. We stayed at the guest house that night, The four of us scattered across two small rooms, none of us sleeping much. I found Sue sitting outside near dawn, wrapped in a blanket, watching the horizon lighten slowly over unfamiliar hills. "Can't sleep either?" I asked, sitting beside her. "I keep thinking about my father," she said. "About what I let happen because I was too afraid to fight back properly. You did what you thought would protect him. I let you believe I didn't love you for 5 years." I was quiet for a moment. "You did. I'm sorry." "I know." She looked at me, eyes red-rimmed but steady. "I'm not asking you to forgive everything right now. I just needed you to know I mean it." I didn't answer immediately, but I didn't move away from her either, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. Old Bao's contact inside the regional prosecutor's office called back just after sunrise. He'd reviewed a preliminary summary of the documents overnight and confirmed the shell companies were already flagged in an unrelated ongoing inquiry into irregular acquisitions across the industry. "This might be the missing piece they needed," Old Bao said, hanging up. "But they'll want more than documents. They'll want testimony. Someone willing to speak on record." "I'll testify," Sue said immediately. "You'll be the first target the moment word gets out," Gu Jingchen warned. "I've been a target for 5 years already," she said. "At least this way it means something." Lin Yao spoke up quietly. "I can testify too. About the recruitment strategy, the shell company structure, everything I was told to do. That puts you at even greater risk," I said. She met my eyes. "I know. I'm doing it anyway." We returned to the city 2 days later, moving carefully, staying in contact with Old Bao's prosecutor connection at every step. Sue's company issued no public statement, but internally, security was quietly tightened around key executives, including her. I found myself, almost without deciding to, staying close to her, not officially back together, not exactly separate either, occupying some undefined space that felt more honest than either extreme. Lin Yao withdrew from her position at the recruiting firm under a plausible medical leave, buying time before her testimony became public knowledge. Gu Jingchen worked quietly behind the scenes, coordinating between all of us and the investigators building the case. For a few days, it felt almost like the danger had receded into something manageable. Then Wei Han resurfaced, not alive, found in an apartment 2 districts away, ruled an apparent suicide by local police unfamiliar with the larger investigation. Sue took the news harder than I expected. "He was a person who worked for me," she said, staring at nothing. "Whatever he did, whatever he became part of, he was still someone I trained, someone I trusted once." "It wasn't your fault," I said. "Everyone keeps saying that." Her voice cracked. "It doesn't make it feel less like it was." Old Bao's contact confirmed privately that the official ruling didn't match several inconsistencies at the scene, evidence suggesting the appearance of suicide had been staged with more urgency than care. "They're cleaning up loose ends," Gu Jingchen said grimly. "Which means they know we're close. Or they're panicking," Lin Yao offered. "Panic makes people careless. Or dangerous," I said. "Both, possibly at the same time." Sue looked at me. "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew we couldn't wait quietly for the next move to be theirs alone. The next development came from an unexpected direction. Sue's father requested to see us both together at his private residence, a request he hadn't made in years given how carefully he'd distanced himself from anything connected to the company since his hospitalization. He looked older than I remembered, thinner, but his eyes were sharp, entirely unlike the frail man I'd assumed illness had left behind. "I should have told you the truth years ago," he said to me directly, without preamble. "Both of you. I let my daughter carry this alone because I believed silence would keep her safe." "It didn't," Sue said quietly. "No," he admitted. "It nearly cost you everything that mattered." He reached into a drawer and withdrew a small recorder. "I documented everything, the year it happened, names, dates, the exact nature of the threats. I was too afraid to use it. I think it's time someone finally did." The recording, when Old Bao's contact reviewed it later that week, was more damning than any document we'd gathered. Director Sue's calm, deliberate voice detailed the initial approach from a representative connected to Lu Zongheng, the explicit threat regarding the forced buyout, and the specific warning delivered the night before my failed proposal that any public commitment between Sue and me would be treated as defiance requiring correction. It also named, unmistakably, the individual who had delivered that final warning in person. Not Wei Han, someone higher, someone who, until that moment, none of us had considered a suspect at all. Director Chin, Vice President Chin, the man who had walked me to the elevator on my last day, who had expressed nothing but sympathy and support throughout this entire unraveling. I read the transcript twice before I could accept what it said. "It can't be him," Sue said, when I told her. He's worked for me since the beginning. He's one of the only people I've never doubted. That's exactly why he'd be effective, Gu Jingchen said grimly. Trusted insiders make the best instruments. We confronted the possibility carefully, unwilling to accuse him outright without confirming the recording's accuracy first. Old Bao's prosecutor contact cross-referenced Chin's financial records quietly, discovering an unexplained series of deposits stretching back 5 years, routed through accounts eventually traceable to the same shell structure connected to Lu Zongheng. The evidence, once assembled, was unambiguous. Chin hadn't simply witnessed the pressure campaign against Su's father. He'd been the one coordinating it from inside her own company the entire time, positioned perfectly to monitor every move both of us made. We couldn't confront him directly without risking him fleeing or destroying evidence, so instead the prosecutor's office moved to build a formal case quietly, coordinating an arrest before Chin could realize how close we'd gotten. The days leading up to it felt unbearably long. Su insisted on continuing normal company operations to avoid raising suspicion, which meant sitting across conference tables from a man she now knew had orchestrated years of quiet cruelty against her family. I watched her hold that composure daily and understood, more clearly than ever, the strength it must have taken to carry this alone for 5 years without breaking visibly even once. I don't know how you did this, I told her one evening, after another exhausting day of performing normalcy. I didn't do it well, she said. I did it alone. There's a difference. I reached over and took her hand. This time, neither of us let go. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning, quiet and unremarkable from the outside, 2 unmarked cars, a brief conversation in Chin's office, and then he was simply gone from the building, escorted out through a service entrance to avoid drawing attention. Su watched from her office window, expression unreadable. It's over, she said finally. Not entirely, Gu Jingchen said, joining us. Chin was an instrument, not the source. Lu Zongheng is still out there, and he'll know within hours that his inside connection has been compromised. Meaning he'll either flee, or he'll do something desperate to eliminate remaining witnesses before it's too late. Su's face tightened. Lin Yao, and your father, Gu Jingchen added, and potentially both of you, if he decides the risk outweighs restraint. I felt the familiar cold dread return, sharper this time, because now there was finally something concrete worth protecting. Security around Su, her father, and Lin Yao tightened within hours, coordinated discreetly through Old Bao's contacts rather than the company's own compromised systems. I stayed close to Su that week, sleeping poorly, watching every unfamiliar face in every hallway with a wariness that exhausted me by the second day. Lin Yao, holed up in a safe house Old Bao arranged, called each evening to confirm she was still safe. This is worse than I imagined when I took this job, she admitted one night. I thought I was helping a company recruit talent. I never imagined poison and disappearances. None of us imagined it, I said. I keep wondering, she said quietly, if things had been different, if I'd met you outside of all this, whether it could have been something real. I didn't know how to answer that honestly, so I didn't try. Some questions deserved silence more than false comfort. Lu Zongheng surfaced publicly 2 days later, not through hiding, but through a calculated countermove, a press statement condemning what he called baseless corporate sabotage against his legitimate business interests, framing the entire investigation as an attack orchestrated by a rival desperate to discredit him. It was audacious. It was also, temporarily, effective. Several news outlets ran the story uncritically, and for a brief, disorienting day, public sentiment shifted towards sympathy for a man who had spent years quietly orchestrating threats, poisoning, and murder disguised as suicide. Su watched the coverage with a controlled fury I hadn't seen from her before. He's trying to control the narrative before the evidence becomes public, she said. Then we make sure it becomes public faster than he can spin it, I said. Gu Jingchen nodded slowly. There's one way to do that quickly. A press conference, with everyone who can testify together, before he narrows the story further. The press conference was scheduled for 3 days later, timed to coincide with the formal filing of charges against both Chin and Lu Zongheng. Preparing for it felt more dangerous than anything we'd done so far. A public declaration meant no more hiding, no more careful anonymity protecting any of us. Su's father insisted on appearing personally despite his health, refusing to let his daughter stand alone in front of cameras after years of silence on his behalf. I've hidden long enough, he said simply, when Su tried to convince him to stay home. This is my mistake to help correct. Lin Yao agreed to appear as well, understanding that public testimony, while dangerous, was ultimately safer than remaining a loose end Lu Zongheng might eventually decide to eliminate quietly. The night before, none of us slept much. I found Su standing at her window again, the way she had at the guest house weeks earlier. Are you afraid? I asked. Terrified, she admitted, but less alone than I've been in years. The morning of the press conference arrived gray and overcast, matching the tension running through everyone gathered backstage. Old Bao's prosecutor contact confirmed the formal charges had been filed an hour earlier, giving legal weight to whatever we said publicly. Sue stepped up first, steady despite the visible tremor in her hands, and spoke plainly about the threats her family had endured for 5 years, the sacrifices made in silence, and the cost of protecting people she loved by isolating herself from the one person who deserved honesty most. She didn't look at me while she said it. She didn't need to. Her father spoke next, confirming every detail, voice heavy but unwavering. Lin Yao's testimony followed, detailing the recruitment strategy and shell company structure with a precision that visibly unsettled the reporters expecting something less damning. By the time the conference ended, Lu Zongheng's carefully constructed narrative had collapsed entirely under the weight of specifics he couldn't easily dismiss. Lu Zongheng was arrested 2 days later, attempting to leave the country through a private airfield outside the city, flagged before departure thanks to coordination between Old Bao's contacts and federal authorities now formally involved. Chen's case moved quickly through preliminary hearings, his cooperation with prosecutors reducing his exposure in exchange for detailing the full extent of Lu Zongheng's operation, including confirmation of Wei Han's death being staged rather than genuine suicide. The company's stock dipped briefly amid the scandal, then stabilized once the narrative shifted clearly toward Sue as the wrong party who had endured years of quiet extortion rather than any wrongdoing of her own. Public sentiment, fickle as always, turned sharply in her favor. For the first time in longer than I could remember, Sue allowed herself to look relieved in front of other people instead of only in private moments neither of us acknowledged afterward. With the immediate danger resolved, the exhaustion of the past weeks finally caught up with all of us. Sue insisted on taking a short leave from the company, delegating operations temporarily to a trusted deputy while she focused on her father's continued recovery and, though she didn't say it explicitly, on whatever remained unresolved between us. I stayed in the city rather than pursuing the executive position that had started this entire ordeal, the offer having quietly dissolved along with the company behind it once Lu Zongheng's arrest became public. Lin Yao, cleared of any criminal liability given her cooperation, decided to leave the city entirely. I think I need somewhere that isn't tangled up with all of this, she told me, the day before she left. Somewhere I can figure out who I am outside of an assignment. I hope you find it, I said and meant it. She smiled faintly. Take care of her. She deserves it, even if it took this to prove it. I hadn't expected Lin Yao's departure to affect me as much as it did. Not romantically, whatever might have existed between us had always been complicated by circumstances neither of us controlled. But her kindness, offered without conditions during the darkest weeks of unraveling everything I thought I understood about my own life, had mattered more than I fully processed until she was gone. Sue noticed my quiet mood that evening. You miss her, she said, not accusingly, just observing. I think I miss the version of things where nothing was this complicated, I admitted. That version never really existed, Sue said. Not for either of us. No, I agreed. I suppose it didn't. We sat together in comfortable silence, something we hadn't managed easily in years, the kind that didn't require filling with explanations or old grievances resurfacing uninvited. Weeks passed before either of us addressed directly what remained unresolved between us. We fell into a strange rhythm, dinners together several times a week, long conversations that gradually excavated years of misunderstanding neither of us had known how to voice properly before everything nearly fell apart. I'm not the same person who proposed to you outside that restaurant 5 years ago, I told her one evening. I know, she said. I'm not the same person who said no. Does that scare you? Less than staying the same would have, she admitted. I studied her carefully. What do you want now, Sue? Not 5 years ago. Now. She was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words with the same deliberate care she'd once used only in boardrooms. I want to earn back the trust one broke, she finally said. Slowly, honestly, without expecting you to hand it back simply because I've finally decided to ask properly. That's different from what you asked before, I said. You asked for another chance, like it was a formality. I know, I was wrong to frame it that way. What are you asking now? Nothing, actually, she said. I'm not asking for anything right now. I'm telling you I intend to keep showing up, honestly, for as long as it takes for you to decide whether that's enough. I hadn't expected that answer. Somehow, it meant more than any grand declaration could have. That might take a while, I said. I have time, he said. I finally understand that waiting well is different from waiting quietly and calling it patience. I almost smiled. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed her completely. Sue's father recovered steadily over the following months, his health improving now that the psychological weight of the secret he'd carried had finally been set down publicly. He and I spoke more during this period than we had in the entire previous 5 years combined, conversations that gradually revealed a man far more self-aware and regretful than the distant, intimidating figure I remembered from earlier days. I should have trusted you both to handle the truth, he told me once. I underestimated what silence would cost. You were trying to protect her, I said. I understand that better now than I used to. Understanding isn't the same as forgiving, he said. I don't expect the second from you. I'm grateful for the first. I appreciated his honesty more than empty reassurance would have offered. Some relationships, I was learning, rebuilt themselves slowly through consistency rather than dramatic gestures. Chen's trial concluded quietly compared to the public spectacle of Lu Zongheng's, his cooperation earning him a reduced sentence that still felt, to those of us who trusted him for years, entirely insufficient against the damage caused. Lu Zongheng's trial dragged on longer, prosecutors methodically building a case spanning years of documented extortion, corporate sabotage, and ultimately, involuntary manslaughter connected to Wei Han's stage death. Sue attended every session she could, insisting on bearing witness personally rather than delegating the emotional weight to lawyers alone. I attended most sessions with her, not because either of us needed the other there strictly, but because neither of us wanted to face it entirely alone anymore. Somewhere in those long, tedious courtroom hours, sitting shoulder to shoulder through testimony and cross-examination, something between us shifted from careful reconciliation into something steadier. The verdict, when it finally came, felt anticlimactic after months of anticipation, a formal reading of charges and sentences that reduced years of fear and manipulation into clinical legal language. Lu Zongheng was sentenced to 18 years, his assets seized, his remaining business interests dissolved under regulatory scrutiny that would likely take years to fully unwind. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered eagerly, hoping for a dramatic statement from Sue. She gave them very little. My family endured something no one should have to endure alone, she said simply. I'm grateful it's over. I'm grateful for the people who refused to let me face it without them. She didn't look at me directly while she said it. She didn't need to. Later that evening, walking home together through streets neither of us rushed through anymore, she finally asked the question I'd been quietly waiting for. Do you think we could start over? She asked. Not the way I asked before. Slowly. Actually starting instead of pretending the past didn't happen. I thought about the version of myself who had knelt outside a restaurant 5 years ago, certain that love meant relentless pursuit regardless of how many times it was refused. I thought about the exhausted version who had walked away weeks ago, certain that indifference was the only remaining option left to protect himself. Neither version, I realized, fully understood what I wanted now. I think, I said slowly, we could try. Not the way it was before. Something new, built on what we've actually learned instead of what we assumed. Sue's eyes filled, though she didn't cry this time. I can live with that, she said. So can I said, and meant it more fully than I had meant almost anything in years. We didn't rush anything after that conversation. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no immediate resumption of the relationship we'd left behind weeks earlier. Instead, we built something quieter, dinners that didn't end in old arguments, conversations that included honesty even when it was uncomfortable, small gestures of consideration neither of us had prioritized enough during the exhausting years before everything nearly collapsed. I returned to work eventually, though not at Sue's company. I joined a smaller firm instead, one entirely unconnected to Lu Zongheng's collapsed network, where I could build a professional identity separate from being simply Sue Wonking's former fiancée and right hand. She respected that distinction more than I expected her to, understanding finally that some things I needed to rebuild required distance from her orbit rather than proximity to it. Months passed this way, steady and unremarkable in the best possible sense. Sue's father continued recovering, eventually returning to occasional advisory roles at the company, though never again the controlling presence he'd once been. Lin Yao sent an occasional message from wherever she'd settled, a small coastal town, judging by the photographs, working in something unrelated to corporate recruitment entirely. I'm glad you two figured it out, she wrote once, after Sue mentioned in a company update that operations had stabilized fully. Take care of each other. I always intended to reply more thoughtfully than I did. Some gratitude, I was learning, existed better in quiet acknowledgement than elaborate words. Gu Jingchen remained a fixture in both our lives, no longer suspicious or mysterious, simply a friend who had spent years protecting Sue quietly and finally received the recognition that protection deserved. One evening, nearly a year after the message that had upended everything I thought I understood about my own life, Sue asked me to meet her at the same restaurant where I'd once knelt outside with a ring in the snow. I almost declined, wary of reopening old wounds unnecessarily. But something in her voice convinced me otherwise. She was waiting when I arrived, standing exactly where she'd stood that terrible morning weeks earlier when everything between us had finally broken open into honesty. "I'm not proposing," she said immediately, noticing my hesitation. "I promised myself I wouldn't rush anything again." "Then why here?" "Because I wanted to stand in this spot and remember it differently," she said. "Not as the place where everything fell apart. As the place where we finally started telling each other the truth." We stood there together for a long moment, the same street, the same cold evening air, an entirely different version of both of us occupying the space where old pain had once lived so persistently. "I used to think love meant never giving up," I said eventually, "no matter how many times you said no. And now I think it means knowing when to stop asking and start actually listening instead." Sue smiled, small and genuine. "I think I finally understand the difference too." We walked home together that night without discussing marriage, without dramatic declarations, simply existing comfortably in each other's company the way two people do when trust has been rebuilt through consistency rather than grand gestures. It felt, for the first time in longer than either of us could remember, entirely uncomplicated. The following spring, Sue's company celebrated its 10th anniversary, an event that would have once meant enormous personal pressure to perform perfectly for cameras and investors alike. Instead, it felt lighter somehow, genuine relief replacing the anxious performance of success that had characterized so much of our earlier years together. Her father attended, visibly proud, standing beside her throughout most of the evening rather than hovering at the periphery the way he once had. Gu Jingchen gave a brief, understated toast, careful not to reveal details still sealed under ongoing legal proceedings related to Lu Zongheng's broader network. I stood near the back for most of the event, comfortable in my role as support rather than spotlight, something that would have bothered me deeply 5 years earlier and now simply felt like an accurate reflection of who I actually was. Sue found me there eventually, slipping her hand into mine without announcement. "Thank you for staying," she said quietly, amid the noise of the celebration around us. "I almost didn't," I admitted. There were moments I was certain walking away permanently was the healthier choice. "What changed?" "You did. Slowly. Consistently. Enough that I stopped expecting the version of you who used silence as protection." She squeezed my hand. "I'll never fully make up for those years." "You don't have to," I said. "You just have to keep being honest going forward. That's enough." She looked at me for a long moment, something unspoken passing between us that didn't require further explanation. "I love you," she said. Not the way I used to, distracted, distant, assuming you'd always be there regardless of how I treated that certainty. "Differently now." "I know," I said. "I love you differently too." We didn't discuss marriage again for several more months, both of us wary of repeating old patterns that had once turned genuine intimacy into performance and obligation. When the subject finally resurfaced, it happened quietly, almost accidentally, during an ordinary evening at home rather than any elaborate occasion. "I found the old ring," Sue said one night, holding the small box I hadn't seen since the night everything unraveled outside that gathering months earlier. "I never returned it to the store. I kept telling myself I would, and never did." "Why?" "I think some part of me always hoped we'd find our way back to a version of this that actually made sense." I looked at the ring, no longer weighted with the desperate exhaustion it had once represented. "Not yet," I said gently, "but someday, I think we will." Sue nodded, setting the box aside without disappointment. "I can wait for someday," she said, "as long as it's real when it comes." Real, when it finally came, arrived quietly the following autumn, nearly 18 months after the message that had first upended everything. We were walking through the same park where we'd had our first real date, years earlier, before either of us understood how complicated love could become under the weight of unspoken fear and inherited danger. I didn't kneel this time. I simply stopped walking, turned to face her, and asked without ceremony or audience, the way I should have understood love required all along. "Marry me," I said. "Not because either of us needs to prove something to anyone else. Because I want to keep building whatever this has become, for as long as we both choose to." Sue's eyes filled, but she didn't hesitate this time. "Yes," she said immediately, steadily, without the fear that had once made that single word impossible for her to offer honestly. We didn't announce the engagement publicly right away, both of us instinctively protective of something that finally felt entirely ours, uncomplicated by company politics or public scrutiny. Her father cried when we told him privately, an uncharacteristic display of emotion from a man who had spent most of his life guarding sentiment as carefully as he guarded business decisions. Gu Jingchen offered a rare, genuine smile, admitting quietly that he'd hoped for this outcome longer than either of us probably realized. Lin Yao sent a message within hours of Su posting a simple photograph online, congratulations arriving warm and entirely without bitterness. I'm happy for you both, she wrote. Truly, some stories deserve better endings than the ones they start with. I read that message several times before responding, grateful for a kindness that had never fully required reciprocation to remain genuine. Planning the wedding looked nothing like the version either of us might have imagined years earlier, when success and image had once dictated nearly every decision in our lives. We kept it small, intentionally, inviting only people who had actually mattered throughout the difficult months that led us here. Gu Jingchen, Old Bao, vice president positions filled by people who'd remained loyal through the scandal, Su's father, and a handful of close friends neither of us had made time for properly in years. Lin Yao couldn't attend in person, but sent flowers with a note simple enough to mean everything. Wishing you both the peace this took far too long to find. Su kept that note afterward, tucked carefully into a drawer alongside photographs from years earlier, evidence of a complicated history that had ultimately shaped something worth protecting rather than something worth regretting entirely. The morning of the wedding arrived clear and quiet. None of the frantic anxiety either of us might once have expected from an event that would have previously felt like a performance for outside approval. I stood waiting at the front of a small garden venue, watching Su walk toward me without hesitation, without the fear that had once made every step toward commitment feel like danger disguised as intimacy. Her father walked beside her, steady despite his health, pride evident in every measured step. When she reached me, she smiled, not the practiced, composed expression she'd once worn in boardrooms, but something entirely unguarded. No more waiting, she whispered, just for me. No more waiting, I agreed. We exchanged vows built from everything we'd actually learned rather than everything we'd once assumed love was supposed to look like from the outside. That evening, after most guests had left, Su and I sat together in the quiet garden, the same ring finally resting where it had always been meant to rest. Do you ever think about that message? She asked. The one that started all of this. Constantly, I admitted. If I'd ignored it, if I'd simply left the city the next day like I planned, we might never have found out the truth, she finished. About my father, about Chen, about all of it. We might have lost each other permanently instead of nearly. Su leaned her head against my shoulder, the gesture entirely natural now, unweighted by old resentment. I'm grateful for whoever sent it, she said, even if we never learn exactly who. We never did discover the sender's identity with certainty, though Old Bao suspected quietly it may have been someone within Lu Zongheng's own organization, disillusioned enough to risk everything for one anonymous act of conscience. Years later, when people occasionally asked how we'd survived a scandal that had once dominated headlines for months, Su would simply say that surviving it hadn't been the hard part. The hard part had been learning to be honest with each other after years of silence disguised as protection. I would usually add that the hardest lesson had been understanding the difference between loving someone desperately and loving someone honestly, that the two, despite years of confusing them, had never actually been the same thing. Our daughter, born 2 years into the marriage, grew up hearing an edited version of the story, a mystery, a reunion, a lesson about trusting the people who stayed rather than chasing the validation of people who hadn't. She never heard about poison, or staged suicides, or corporate conspiracies spanning years of quiet cruelty. Some truths, we decided together, belonged only to the two of us who had actually lived through them. On quiet evenings, long after the scandal had faded into a distant chapter neither of us needed to revisit often, Su would sometimes find the small ring box in a drawer and simply hold it for a moment, remembering. We got here eventually, she'd say. We did, I'd agree. Longer road than I expected. Worth it, though. She'd smile, setting the box aside, returning to whatever ordinary evening task had briefly interrupted the memory dinner, a conversation with our daughter, plans for tomorrow that no longer felt shadowed by threats neither of us could name aloud. The ring she'd once given me sat now beside the one I'd finally given her in return, two symbols of a love that had nearly been destroyed by silence and was ultimately saved by the courage to finally tell each other the truth. Some stories, I'd learned, weren't ruined by nearly falling apart. They were simply proven, eventually, by what survived.